Picture a stone block the size of a school bus. It weighs more than 60 tons. Now imagine moving it 300 miles, across sand, without a single engine. No cranes, no trucks, no electricity, and yet somehow that block ended up exactly where someone wanted it. Stacked 40 feet in the air, fitted so precisely you couldn't slide a knife between it and the stone beside it. Modern engineers have tried to recreate this with today's equipment. Some have failed. So here's the question that should keep you up at night. If ancient humans had none of our tools, how did they build entire cities? Walls, temples, palaces, streets for thousands of people, using nothing but muscle, rope, and imagination. The answer isn't magic. It's stranger than that. It's a secret hiding in plain sight. Before there were cities, there was almost nothing like them. For most of human history, people moved in small bands, chasing herds, following rivers, never staying anywhere long enough to need walls. Then, something changed. Around 10,000 years ago, in scattered pockets across the world, people began doing something their ancestors never had. They stayed. They planted seeds instead of just gathering what grew wild. They watched those seeds become food, season after season, in the same patch of ground. And once a family's survival was tied to a specific field, wandering stopped making sense. But farming alone doesn't build a city. Farming just builds a village. So what turned a cluster of mud huts into a metropolis with thousands of strangers living shoulder to shoulder? That question would take archaeologists decades to answer, and the answer had almost nothing to do with buildings at all. Before a single brick was made, someone had to choose a spot. And this decision determined whether a settlement would die in a decade or last 4,000 years. Imagine standing on a riverbank deciding the future of a civilization you'll never live to see. You'd need water, obviously, for drinking, for crops, for the animals that would feed everyone. You'd need fertile soil that could feed far more people than it took to farm it, because a city runs on surplus. You'd want a natural barrier. A cliff, a bend in the river, a hill, something that made attackers think twice. And you'd want to be near a trade route, because a city that can't get stone, timber, or metal from somewhere else will never grow past its own backyard. Get all of that right, and you have the foundation of a city. Get it wrong, and the desert swallows your ambition. But choosing the location was the easy part. The real mystery was what came next. Somewhere between a great location and a finished temple, someone had to answer a much harder question. What do you actually build with? In river valleys, the answer was often underfoot. Mud mixed with water and straw, poured into wooden molds and baked by the sun into bricks hard enough to stack a wall. It sounds almost too simple, yet cities built from sun-dried mud brick have survived for thousands of years. Elsewhere, people turned to stone, timber, and plaster, each requiring its own patient process of trial and failure passed down through generations. But mud bricks and timber only get you so high. For temples that needed to reach toward the sky, and walls that needed to survive centuries, ancient builders needed something far more stubborn. They needed stone, massive stone, and that created a problem nobody had solved before. Now picture this. A quarry worker, thousands of years ago, staring at a cliff face of solid granite, with no steel, no diamond blades, no power tools of any kind. How do you cut something harder than the tools you own? The answer, it turns out, is patience disguised as brute force. Workers pounded the stone's surface with harder stones, over and over, wearing grooves into the rock like water carving a canyon, just far faster and far more deliberate. In some cultures, wooden wedges were hammered into cracks and soaked with water, swelling until the stone split along a line as clean as any saw cut. Later, as bronze and copper tools appeared, cutting grew faster, though the metal was still softer than the stone it worked against, so even these advanced tools relied on relentless repetition rather than raw sharpness. This is the part few people expect. The greatest ancient stonework wasn't achieved through clever tools. It was achieved through years of stubborn, repeated labor that modern builders would find almost unbearable. But cutting the stone was only step one. Somebody still had to move it. Here's where the story gets even stranger. Some of these stones weighed as much as a loaded freight truck, and they needed to travel miles, then rise dozens of feet into the air. Picture teams of workers laying down logs like rollers, dragging a sledge loaded with stone across them, one grinding inch at a time. Picture ramps of packed earth spiraling upward so a block could be hauled uphill instead of lifted straight up, turning an impossible vertical problem into a long, brutal horizontal one. Ropes made from plant fiber, levers made from timber. In some regions, water was even poured onto sand ahead of the sledge, reducing friction just enough to make the impossible merely exhausting. None of this was one clever trick. It was dozens of small tricks layered together, multiplying what a single human body could do. And still, none of it explains the biggest mystery of all. Because here's the truth that changes everything. The hardest part of building a city was never the stone. It was the people. Imagine trying to coordinate 10,000 workers with no phones, no blueprints as we know them, no radios to shout instructions across a construction site. Someone had to feed them, house them, assign them tasks, and keep them working toward the same goal for years, sometimes decades. Archaeological evidence from ancient labor camps reveals something remarkable. Workers weren't a faceless mass. They were organized into specialized crews: haulers, cutters, masons, engineers, each with distinct roles, distinct rations, even distinct living quarters based on skill. This wasn't slavery in the way many people assume. In several of history's most famous projects, evidence points to paid laborers, rotating in shifts, treated as skilled professionals. In other words, the true technology of the ancient world wasn't a tool at all. It was an idea. Organize enough people, and you can move anything. But an army of workers needs something no ramp or rope can provide: food. Every single day. For years. This is where farming, storage, and trade all had to work in perfect sync. Grain had to be grown far beyond what any one family needed. It had to be stored safely, protected from rot and rodents. It had to be transported, sometimes across great distances, to feed people who weren't farmers at all: bricklayers, sculptors, scribes, and overseers. A city, it turns out, is really a machine for turning surplus food into everything else: art, religion, government, and yes, architecture. Without full granaries, there are no pyramids. Without organized farmers, there are no palaces. As cities matured, so did their ambition. Builders learned to lay deeper foundations to keep structures from sinking. They learned leverage, how a long wooden beam could multiply a handful of workers into the force of dozens. They built scaffolding to reach impossible heights and ramps that grew taller alongside the buildings themselves. Each generation inherited the mistakes and breakthroughs of the last. Knowledge didn't vanish. It compounded. So, did ancient humans really raise these cities with nothing but bare hands? Not exactly. They used tools. They used animals. They used ramps, levers, and rollers. Simple machines that quietly did the work of engines. What they didn't have in technology, they made up for with something far harder to replicate: relentless coordination. So let's go back to that block of stone, sitting 40 feet in the air, fitted so precisely you can't slip a blade beside it. It wasn't lifted by magic. It wasn't moved by machines we've forgotten how to build. It was lifted by an idea, the same idea that turned scattered families into farmers, farmers into cities, and strangers into coordinated teams capable of reshaping the earth itself. Ancient humans didn't need cranes because they had already discovered something more powerful. Thousands of ordinary people working together could accomplish what no single machine ever could. The greatest machine in the ancient world wasn't built from metal or stone, it was built from us.